So we were talking recently about uh, study and practice, and there were various opinions about it, and I'm still interested in hearing more about it. So I'm talking today about why study is important in practice from my point of view. If you have different points of view or you want to add to it, please let me hear from you about it. Okay? So recently, since we did talk about it, I'd like to explain some of what I think about it. We were encouraged in Tassajara at the time I began in '67 to study along with sitting by Suzuki Roshi, but he also emphasized we should not be attached to the study of words. And after all, because our practice has to be verified by our own experience. But study has a way of bringing up conditions and ideas that we only touch on with our thinking. And we might have it in the back of our mind, but not particularly think about it, not bring it to the fore. And study sometimes will bring things like that to the fore. And we either shy away from direct meeting with ideas that we are not used to thinking about, or else we want it to be in very small doses. But when we study, all of us is present, not just our small mind, but our big mind is all present. And so the words reach us in ways that aren't always conscious words. And we may not harvest the fruits of such studies for many years. So you might read something about emptiness and not really harvest that fruit of understanding until, say, 20 years later. You just don't know. But putting it inside and having it there at the ready is a good way to practice sitting, because it's in there working whether you see it or not. Actually, just a minute. I'm going to turn up the lights. I forgot to. Okay. So I think in a way it's like when you decide to bake a cake. First thing you do is you find a recipe that you'd like to learn and you study it. And that takes the time afterwards to get all the ingredients. Sometimes you have to go out and get them, and that takes time. And when you're ready to make the cake, you turn on the oven and then you get all the pans ready. So far, we've been studying the recipe and checking that everything is now ready to begin. And basically, we've only been engaged in study for how to make a good cake. We haven't really started doing it. And nothing of concrete use is being made of the cake yet. But when we're ready, we begin to make the cake and loosely check the recipe while we're working. And we even check the oven temperatures. We check everything all around. And we finish assembling the cake and put it in the oven. And now we have to wait for a while. And that waiting is not always easy. But when you see the cake in the oven raising, then you're a little more happy about it. And when the cake is ready, we take it out of the oven and cool it. And then all of this is done with the help of the cookbook and the utensils. And you could say that the study has been really necessary up until now, until the cake is actually made. And you can also say that you could have made the cake without even looking, but you just used imagination to make it. So at best, it might have been a success, might have. And at worst, you could say that you would only become a one cake person. So if you want to expand and understand what you're doing, study will start the ball rolling for what you want to do. It will expand your horizons on making a cake, for example. Now, learning from study increases the understanding of our own experiences, and it gives us a vocabulary to voice experience if it's ever needed. It also opens us up to others' experience possibilities and how we can help them when we become comfortable with our own experiences. Now, I'm not talking about esoteric experiences, but about basic experience practices of body, speech, and mind in our efforts to master body, speech, and mind. Most, if not all of us, expect to have a clear development of mastering Buddhist study from the beginning to the end. such as going from clear steps of 1 to 10. We become confused in our practice when we go instead from 1 to 6, and then slide back to 3. And then we go forward to 8 to our great pleasure and suddenly find ourselves back at 1. We become confused when we go instead from numbers to numbers of what we expected but didn't actually get. And so we find in the end, we end up sticking around 2 for a very long time. And this gives us a great amount of frustration because we expect when we hit 8, the next step is 9. And instead, we find ourselves often back at 1. So when we listen to other people talk, it sounds like their practice goes from 1 to 1, or sometimes 1 to 8, and then it stays there, it sounds like. But nobody has the breadth of spirit at this point to see such development clearly. And there are no steps anyway of 1 to 10. We just like to think there are. It only seems logical in practice when we begin, because most of our practice after beginning takes place in the dark. And we're like a lotus that roots in the mud and grows upward in the dark water until it's ready to bloom. But until it blooms, almost all of its growing is in the dark. And in the midst of a world of trouble and sorrow, like the lotus, we put our roots into physical existence of this world. But we do it in ignorance. And we begin to learn how self-nature relates to reality, also in ignorance. Our changes at this point are very imperceptible, and in the beginning, we're completely unaware of all of our circumstances. We explore our self-nature as much as we can, but we're ignorant of Buddha nature. We may be troubled by what we see or hear outside, but we don't question things until we're distressed enough to look at them. And by that time, we're usually driven to change of some kind. But change usually means to change the world, to change conditions, or other people. It usually does not mean to change ourselves. It does not mean to master self-nature. I, me, and mine are too rooted in our minds to see anything beyond them. But dissatisfaction persists. And about this time, we find a teacher and a place that makes sense to us and stay there to meditate. We think, if meditation works, I should feel better, be better, act better, and solve my problems better. The problem is that the changes don't happen in a logical framework. Beginning meditation seems understandable, so we assume that everything that follows will be more of the same, only progressing in clear, defined steps towards enlightenment. We think that if we follow the practice step by step, however hard it is, we should see the flowering. We should understand and achieve our goal. But experience comes up short of expectation. Even when we sit with dedication, we're dismayed to find that we're still the same people. We have the same shortcomings. We have the same mistakes. We're still annoyed by the same things. We have the same body problems, and we make all mistakes on top of that because we can't stop thinking, and we can't stop anything in the emotional realm of everything rolling around in our heads. We sit regularly, we practice mindfulness, and we begin to seriously wonder, what does meditation do anyway? Why should I continue? And those questions seem unanswerable, but when we sit, something changes imperceptibly because it's changing in the dark. We come out of a cloud of indifference and ignorance and look, pardon me, for the first time around. We really look. We even begin to really think for the first time. We begin to feel genuine emotions for the first time. And like a newborn babe, we touch life for the first time, and it's not pleasant. But in that experience, we stop our mad rush to the end. Meditation is not about gaining power or an ability even to control our lives, or even to make things just better. It does not relieve dissatisfaction, but it does show us clearly how to do that. We meet the self in all its glory in meditation. We come to understand how we sabotage our life with ideas, how we undermine practice with untamed emotions and wrong perceptions. And in sitting, we look without fear at how we think, how we act, and how we speak. Meditation is how we see the spinning wheel of thought and learn to relax it. And when the anonymous chatter stops telling us who we are, we look to see what else is there. Meditation is living as we are, relating to the world as it is. And we recognize ever-present and awake Buddha nature, which is our true nature. We recognize that kindness, compassion, patience, and generosity really are us, our true nature. Cruelty, violence, and indifference on a worldwide scale are shocking, but on a personal level may be so subtle that we ignore it. So we meditate to first root out the subtle and not so subtle qualities that promote greed, hate, and delusion, beginning on our personal level. We change every time we sit. We can't keep score because the changes happen in the dark. That is what is present but unseen. If you look at a slow motion video of a tulip opening from a bud to a full bloom, if you look at a slow motion video at the tulip, it's a breathtaking thing to watch. But when you look at a tulip in real time, it looks like nothing is happening. Yet one day you look outside and the tulip is in full bloom. A gardener would have understood every single change. But another person just thinks it's like magic. A gardener would have a profusion of flowers and plants through understanding and nourishing the natural growth of plants. We nourish our natural budding life in meditation, whenever we sit in peaceful repose or even in noisy confusion. When you come to the Zendo, meditation with others seems ordinary, because besides meeting friends and sitting, nothing much seems to happen. But like the tulip in slow motion, when sitting with others, we're in motion in a different way than being alone. We change in a subtle way, and we're catalyzed by the presence of others to change. We let go of thoughts and emotions. We adjust to sensations, to sounds outside, to sounds inside, or make minor adjustments in postures. We meet different perspectives in others and the ways they sit, and we learn from them. We adapt to this person or that and have to deal with complex emotions. It seems like we do nothing but study ourselves from the moment we enter the Zendo to the minute we leave. We cooperate. The room is alive with change. We sit 30 minutes, and our impression later is that, besides the buzz in our heads and physical difficulties, nothing much happened. But in slow motion, we'd hear the crickets, the birds, the trees, the dogs barking, the motor in the distance, and the mind slowing down, the bodies relaxing and settling. The floor creaks and the throats clear, breaths deepen, sunlight and shadows move, and time passes with change upon change. Outside, we'd pass 30 minutes and not remember much about it. But in the Zendo, we remember every little sweet or terrible passing minute of it, and we are deeply, deeply enriched just by being in the middle of it. Imagine your life if you were aware of every moment as if you were in the zendo, and think how long a day would become. Think how long a week would become. Would a day or a week be the same if we lived in small moments? Or would that be slow motion for us? Would we see imperceptible changes then? Would we ignore the richly endowed growing plant that we are, stretching into unknown places with natural abilities? Would we still rush to the finished bloom to reach enlightenment? On the other hand, if we ignore the plant itself, would we even know the bloom if we met it? If we came out of oblivion and paid attention moment to moment, would our lives not then become a long, incredible, endless journey unfolding from root to bloom? But our journey will unfold moment to moment, whether we're aware of it or not. We can rush ahead or stop and know just this. And then living moment to moment, where would ignorance be? Where would enlightenment be? Thank you. And Peter is now finished with his seminar and will join us here. So, do you have any questions at all about study and practice? Yeah, Mike.
It's funny you bring this up, because I was thinking about this. I was worried that I was becoming obsessive with my study because I study every day, and I'm reading currently right now the Genjo Koan 3 commentaries, and I was worried that I was becoming attached to study and not practice. But I'm finding that my method of study is helping my practice in a sense, because it helps me to see what my practice is doing. And I find that with meditation alone, it doesn't work enough for me, that I do need to study. And I enjoy reading books on Zen, and I enjoy reading different forms of philosophy of Buddhism and stuff like this. So you've actually helped kind of relieve me of the worry that I was becoming so attached to study that it wasn't going to be effective on me, because I'm finding that I'm slowly starting to understand my meditation and Zen just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit more when I combine the two of them together. And so is it okay to be excessive in your studies, or is it something I should be cautious with because I could become so attached to it that it doesn't do what it's supposed to do for me? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. But I think, Michael, that all of us have our own characteristics. Some of us like to talk a lot. Some of us don't like to talk much. Some of us like to listen to things, people talking about ideas, and some of us don't. Some of us are a more quiet type, and some of us aren't. Uh, I think studious people are always going to be studious people, no matter what. So it doesn't, I don't think it makes any difference, but if it blocks what you're doing in sitting itself, then you have to be careful. So when you use the word excessive study, I would say maybe not excessive, but just regular study. Yeah, I think that's very helpful. And I've always found that study helped me a lot, mostly because it brings up questions that I frequently avoid. And when I study them, there they are right in front of me, and I think about them. So, yeah.
I feel as if study, in this sense, at least in the sense that I get from, Buddhist study, is different from the kind of study that we associate study with, which is memorization and knowing stuff.
Yeah.
And like you, I do find that there's also maybe less of a set curriculum too. And so I find that when I pick something up, I also get a deeper understanding of what I'm doing. For example, last night I started reading about the 4 stages in Hinduism of the different type of life. I forget, ashrama, forget, but and I went there from Buddha Dharma to the 4 stages. And, I was really gratified to, see read about the stage of the forest dweller, and how a stage in one's life, what I've been feeling is that stage of more retreat, more advisory role, more as a teacher, and less of a doer. And so for me, even though, just finding that, I found very relevant and relevant.
Yeah, but I agree. Actually, it doesn't, you can learn as much sometimes just listening to musical lyrics or some other things, as long as you don't let things interfere with your main point, which is meditation. And if it becomes like the satellites around your meditation, that's different than if they replace meditation.
I've kind of using my reading as an extension of my meditation. I'll usually meditate first, and then I'll sit down and read for a while, and then go off and do some calligraphy or something like that, and kind of let it cook in my brain and stuff like that. And it was just funny because I look at my den and it's full of books on Buddhism. And I sit there and go, am I getting obsessive about this? Am I becoming so attached that I can't use it properly? But as you've said, and as Ellen has said and stuff, that it's like, it makes it easier for me to kind of compare it, to put the two together and study. And after I meditate, when my head's kind of in the mode to do it, stuff like that, then I go out about my life and I'm still thinking about it while I'm doing that. And I just, I know that you've got to be careful with study. It becomes an obsession, or like you say, it blocks. And I'm finding so far, it's still just, they augment each other. It makes it easier for me to meditate because now I know what I'm doing when I'm meditating after I read about it.
So meditation is first, and everything
Yes.
follows is a form that supports meditation. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way I always do it.
Matt, you have a question?
More a response to some of the things that you brought up, if that's all right.
Sure.
There is a teacher who, although not Buddhist, much of what he teaches is very consistent with what Zen teaches. And however he couches his teaching, his name is J. Krishnamurti. He couches his teaching in original language that addresses the specific life circumstances that we are experiencing without metaphor. And what's happened for me now, I've been reading about religion and in particular Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, since I don't know how many years now, almost 40 years. And I have found that what I have gone through during that process is a process of negation, that I've had to shed so many things. What I liked about Krishnamurti is that he threw things in my face that, yes, I may not want to have to look at, as you said. That was part of your talk towards the end, is that study often does throw things in your face that you're avoiding looking at. And I see the value in that tremendously. But in Buddhist texts and in Dharma talks that speak from the perspective of metaphor, I see it from metaphor and not the nature of our experience, not specific, the nature of our pain, the nature of fear and desire of all of the synonyms and their subtle meanings that go with those two words, and anger, and hatred, etc., that those things need to be explored, and maybe real world examples provided, and discussions had from perhaps a personal level. But to get into all of this metaphor, my God, I have spent years trying to shed myself this horribly thick layered skin of all of this stuff in meditation, and I mean to rid myself of it in meditation, in my own thought, just to shed it, and it just troubles me deeply that this is such a significant part of the teaching. There's a wonderful, I don't know whether it can be called a koan or just a story that illustrates this. It happens to be a Zen story. It really isn't metaphoric. What it is the successor of a teacher is with his teacher on the teacher's deathbed, and the teacher begs him to take tremendous care of the written record of the teacher's dharma. And as the student is listening to the teacher's instructions, he takes this pile of papers that has been collected by the teacher during his time as a teacher, and he tosses them in the fire. And the teacher says to him, "What are you doing?" And his response is, "What are you saying?" And clearly, and the first time I read this, I understood it. The Dharma is alive in his successor. The Dharma is alive in his successor. We have this tremendous history of Buddhism that is, when it doesn't address specifically life, without life devoid of historical context, life devoid perhaps this is just unique to me because of where I am in my practice. I don't know, but it's a very strong feeling that comes out of years and years of practice and study, and I just wanted to articulate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Actually, I'd like to say a few things on what you just said. One of them is when you struggle with the self, then you're told often that you should just embrace the self and make friends with the self. And eventually, when you realize that the self is a creation in the first place, then you have to ask yourself, what is there to shed? What is there to get rid of? And also, I wanted to mention that one of our members here, Arvin, who's away on something with his family, went to a Krishnamurti school in India when he was a boy. I think he was there for like regular school terms, and so he's familiar. You might want to talk to him about Krishnamurti sometime.
Anyway, he said to us, Krishnamurti's message was, don't think so much.
Yes, I agree completely. Unless, of course, you have to. And a core part of his teaching is that the journey is a process of negation. Not this, not that, not this, not that, and so on, until you reach the point where you're left with nothing.
Yeah.
Uh,
But your moment,
not,
you're left with nothing but where you are and who you are.
yes. Yes.
So you can't cling to nothing either.
Right. It's an idea.
Yeah. Joanne.
So first of all, that was a beautiful talk, Jane. So the place I practiced before, it was Rinzai, and I did koan practice, but we never were assigned a book. I mean, we never did that. We never there was no formal study. You know, the koans were the study. And it was, I would say it was a very experiential perspective to the practice. And one of the things I was excited about here was, you know, there is the book club, and you know, Peter is very oriented towards, you know, like the history and study and knowledge. And this talk made me think about, like, there's you know, our levels of understanding. At the most basic, you could be totally ignorant, you know, and like, it made me, you use the cooking a cake metaphor. And I remember when I was maybe like 12 or 13, my mom had bought some beautiful large strawberries. I decided I wanted to make a strawberry shortcake. Well, what happened was I used baking soda instead of baking powder. And it tasted like soap. And my family was there. Like, the family was invited over, and so this was served at dinner, and it was trash. But I've never made that mistake again. So there was, you know, that ignorance, that, like, studying and following the recipe, I learned, like, even following the recipe, you can screw it up like royally. And then but I'm also thinking about, you know, some of the things that we talk about, like, you know, when I've been to book club, I mean, that stuff can be so opaque and difficult to understand. And maybe you get it in one moment, and then, you know, you lose it in the next. But what I feel like, that kind of study, the value of that is because it's not often like real straightforward. For me, at least, it's I have to, like, when I'm reading those things, and doing koan practice, I have to question what I think that I know. And to me, that's really like something that is maybe a real nugget of value in study. Is it just kind of broadens your mind to new ideas, to looking at the ideas that you do have. And but it also applies, like, to what Matt was saying about, like, you know, the ideas that you have about yourself, right? You know, because there's been plenty of times I would love to just shed a lot of, you know, the habits or things that are my core characteristics. But in essence, really, like, for me, practice and, you know, study and all that, like, with enough practice, I feel like there is that pinpoint of time where, you know, something may happen, and, you know, Joanne's, I don't know, Joanne's anger trigger is like right there, but I have that brief moment where I can decide whether or not I'm going to pull the trigger. And And to me, it's sort of a practice of like acceptance of who I am, but also in terms of the study, when you hear like stories of other people's Zen experience, or like the historical figures with the koans, there are things that like, oh, maybe you heard it like 12 years ago, but suddenly in the moment it shows up, and you relate it to your personal life, and it teaches you in that moment, whereas like it's been dormant for 12 years, but if you hadn't studied, it wouldn't have even been there. So yeah, I don't know, like I'm a total bibliophile. I'm right there with you, Michael. But yeah, I don't know. I think both places are great, because the ignorance, that's a big beginner's mind too, right? That teaches you as well. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Joanne. Those are interesting. And who's up with Rachel?
Thanks for the talk, Jane. Just a couple things quickly. I was thinking of poems and poetry, and I'm a writer, but there are poems, and I studied, English stuff. There are poems I read, 50 years ago at least, and now it means something completely different. It's really interesting how a poem, you can read it at different times, and they're rather, sometimes rather tricky to grasp in the first place. And then years later, they make sense. I mean, to me, poetry is a good example of paradox and mystery, and then sometimes illumination, but through the years it changes. And to me, good study has some of that. But the other thing is, Jane, you're talking about cooking really reminded me. I have a friend who is, a wonderful cook, but more than that, she ran a cooking store. Anyway, she's quite old and ill, but she has perhaps 1,000 books on cooking and food and history, all of that, culinary. And I've known her many decades, and for her, cooking has been a meditation, but reading about it is. What I mean is that she's a lovely example to me over the years of the delight she takes in just learning about something. And her, you could call it study, but I mean, she didn't go to school to learn how to cook, but she has a delight and interest that certainly teaches her more about how to cook. It gives her tips, I suppose, but it's actually just being open to all the different aspects of that. And even now that she's just Parkinson's, she's unwell, but she would love to just pick up any old book, and then she might totter off to the kitchen and fix a toasted bacon sandwich or something. But I mean, it's like she still finds real life in fixing something for someone else. But it's her use of all those 1,000 cookbooks and magazines, just piled up. But it reminded me that I don't know why that can't apply for those who enjoy that, why that can't apply to Zen, all the koans in the world. You might enjoy that, or all the haiku. Anyway, thank you, Jane, for the talk.
It's interesting. When I was 14, there was a very special toothpaste that came out called spearmint toothpaste, and it was green, a big tube, and it was green, and it tasted just like spearmint flavor, but it was a toothpaste. And I had an experience where I made a cake when I was 14. I was making it for the family, and it was a ready-made in a box, so I just threw it in and added water, right? And I thought, and I remembered this icing that you just whipped up egg whites and other things, and I threw it in without looking it up. And I threw in this mix, and I made this toothpaste-like texture of a icing. But then for some reason, we had all these colorings, and I threw in green coloring. And when I made the cake and put it out, everybody who tasted it kept saying, "This tastes like toothpaste." That was my biggest failure, was that nobody could eat it. It was a large cake, but it did taste exactly like toothpaste. This special spearmint flavored toothpaste. Anyway, just for a laugh for the day.